There we are. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Alex Bertolucci. I'm the Oregon Communications Manager for Circular Action Alliance. And today is the second webinar in our webinar series about different sections of the Oregon program plan. During this webinar today, we're going to talk about producer responsibility, or PRO, recycling acceptance list, and the depot collection for those materials. We have several other webinars taking place in the series, and you can find more information and register for those at the link that my colleague Jerry will drop into the chat. It's to the Circular Action Alliance website. While you're there, you can find all sorts of other good information as well. I also want to let folks know that this webinar is developed mainly for local governments and recycling service providers. And so while we appreciate all of the interest from producers, you might not get as much out of it as some of the other sessions that we offer as well. So feel free to drop off if you want. Feel free to hang around. Again, Jerry will drop a link to a page that shows all of the events that are coming up. And several of those are focused specifically on or for producers. For today's webinar, all attendees are in listen-only mode. You are not able to turn on your microphone or your camera. However, you can use the chat and the Q&A tool found in your Zoom toolbar. We just ask that all of your questions go to the Q&A so we can keep track of those a little bit easier. And while I take a minute to introduce the CAA team, if you all want to, and I see some folks already got started here, introduce yourself in the chat, say good morning and who you're representing or where you're coming from. We always like to see all those folks who are here. Here's a quick look at what we'll be covering today. As you can see, you'll learn a bit about who CAA is, see an overview of the PRO depot system, look at some specific materials and depot operations, and then we'll talk about some next steps. And there should be a time at the end to answer questions. Before we get into the meat of the webinar today, I just want to take a few minutes and introduce you to CAA as an organization. Circular Action Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to implementing effective packaging, extended producer responsibility, or EPR laws in the US. We were founded by 20 member companies that you can see here, and these founding members provide CAA with startup capital and continued oversight and governance. Because CAA is the sole producer responsibility organization in Oregon to have submitted a plan, and in many of the other states, we're really committed to working with the thousands of member producers that are obligated under the different EPR laws. CAA's mission is to deliver harmonized, best-in-class compliance services to all producers to advance an efficient and effective circular economy. We'll meet state regulations, build on existing systems and structures when possible, and work with interest holders across the circular economy and across Oregon to advance environmental outcomes of covered products. Here in Oregon, we're especially focused on ensuring local governments, service providers, and community members have the tools, resources, and funding to successfully implement the RMA, which is coming up soon. And lastly, before I turn it over to Marisa to talk more about the topic today, I just want to introduce you to the Oregon team. We've been growing rapidly and making sure that we have the folks that we need to ramp up for a good implementation of the law. So this team has a deep understanding of the recycling and waste system in Oregon and is already putting that experience to good use as we approach the launch of the RMA. So if you do have any questions, take a look at these folks and you can reach out to them. Nick and Marisa will be available to answer questions at the end of today's webinar. So I'm going to turn it over to Marisa to chat more about our topic today.
Thank you, Alex. I'm really delighted to be with you all today and want to thank you for taking the time to join us while we share an overview of CAA's Depot program, which will be rolled out across the state so Oregonians will be able to recycle materials from the Pro Acceptance List. Speaking of materials, there are two lists that we need to distinguish from one another in order to ensure clarity for the rest of today's presentation. One list of recyclable materials is the Uniform Statewide Collection List, otherwise known as the USCL, which is comprised of recyclable materials that may be commingled. These items, including steel and aluminum cans, paperboard, plastic bottles, among many others, as you know, are often collected through curbside programs and are also recycled at depots. The other list is what we'll be talking about today. Those are the Pro Depot list or Pro Acceptance List items. The materials on this list will be collected at depots and through recycling events. They're recyclable, but they must be collected separately through depots and collection events rather than through commingled curbside programs. Over the 2.5 years of the program plan, beginning in July 2025 and going through December 2027, CAA will build out a network of pro depots and collection points across the state to fully achieve the convenience standard as required by Oregon statute and DEQ rulemaking. CAA will launch and support significant education and outreach efforts to ensure broadly accessible, accurate information for communities on topics such as depot locations, depot accepted materials, proper preparation of materials for recycling, and importantly, for our smooth depot operations and program success, the top level contaminants people should avoid. So the purpose of pro depots, we want to share a little bit about that. So why CAA will be creating a network of pro depots in Oregon. The answer is that pro depots provide Oregonians with free and accessible collection sites for a special selection of items that meet the following criteria. First, they have to be recyclable materials. The items depots will collect have a demonstrated track record of being recyclable. Second, while recyclable, they're not easily sorted by a CRPF, a commingled recyclables processing facility, also called a MRF. They cannot be easily sorted from other materials. And third, there are established responsible end markets available for these materials. To create accessibility, CAA must meet a convenience standard based on statute and rules to ensure there are sufficient drop-off locations to meet the needs of communities. Okay, the materials on the Pro Acceptance List, here we go. As I mentioned earlier, they are recyclable. They have known responsible end markets, but they can't be easily sorted at a CRPF and therefore can't be commingled with other items. The materials on the Pro Acceptance List, which will be accepted at our Pro depots, are plastic lids, aluminum foil and pressed aluminum products, bulky plastic containers, shredded paper, rigid plastic handles such as PackTech handles, polyethylene film, glass bottles and jars, and finally, through a separate set of depots and a separate collection network, block weight expanded polystyrene, also known as styrofoam or EPS, which we'll go into more depth about EPS in a moment. So there's a couple specific materials that we wanted to highlight and share a little bit more information about. These are our special cases, and starting with EPS, block weight expanded polystyrene. We do have a plan for a special separate network for collection of EPS. Okay, so some more detail here. Expanded polystyrene, EPS, has several inherent properties that make it more difficult and more challenging to collect. It is bulky and it requires significant space both for collection, for storage, and for transportation. It requires densification with specialty equipment before being transported for significant distances. It also has several look-alike foams, other types of foam that can be easily confused by generators, by users, and even sortation centers. And that complicates the matter of collecting it. The lookalikes include expanded polyethylene, also called EPE, and expanded polypropylene, EPP, which look very similar to EPS, and they can be difficult to distinguish, but need to be separated from EPS for optimal processing. EPS is also facing some uncertainty due to upcoming regulations in our neighboring state of California, where there are thresholds in place in California law for recycling goals, which, if not met, could result in a ban on the material. And that would affect the likelihood of its being used for packaging in Oregon as well in the long term. For these reasons, CAA will establish a separate network for collecting and processing EPS in Oregon. Let's get into a little bit more detail about our approach. We plan a phased rollout of collection of EPS in Oregon. We will begin by working with established collectors and processors of EPS in metro area, Lane County, and Tillamook County. In later phases, we will expand our EPS collection network to include southern, coastal, and eastern parts of the state. The benefits of launching EPS collection in phases are that it allows us to gather data and better understand the patterns of generation, including both consumer and commercial, and to identify whether confusion about foam types is a ongoing and continuing problem, and how we can best strategize for that. And finally, it will allow us time to monitor shifts to non-foam protective packaging, as well as to track updates to California's potential ban on EPS. Now let's move to speaking about glass collection in Oregon. Oregon has a strong and effective glass recycling strategy in place, and our aim is to preserve existing glass collection initiatives, to add to their effectiveness, and to introduce additional collection points through the Pro Depot network. With this multifaceted approach, CEA will guide Oregon to far exceed the 45% goal for collection. A few important notes to share about glass. First, CAA has identified 76 communities that currently accept glass bottles and jars. Second, glass recycling collection is most prevalent in urban communities, leaving many communities to dispose of glass packaging through landfills. And finally, another point to note is that all communities that have existing curbside glass collection are encouraged to continue to offer that service and will receive an incentive to do so. Future glass collection at Pro Depots. So here is a visual representation of some of our plans for glass. Pro Depots will provide new collection points for glass recycling. The Pro Depots network will be an expansion of existing glass collection. The transportation logistics for glass and other pro materials listed will be managed by OBRC. They're already an experienced collector and processor of recycled glass. CAA will ensure that Oregon's glass is delivered to responsible end markets. And finally, Pro Depots could be a future collection point for reusable glass in addition to glass bound for recycling. Okay, so let's share a little bit about how we anticipate the Pro Depots operating. First, it's important to talk about the convenience standard. I've mentioned that CAA will be creating a network of Pro Depots to meet convenience standards based on up-to-date Oregon population data. Convenience standards are outlined in rule and in the program plan. So you can look there for more information. The requirements are a bit complex. So we've broadly outlined here a few of the major points about how convenience standards are determined. They're based on population, both at the county level and at the city level. And they are determined based on those populations. Well, and also metro versus non-metro is another factor. The convenience standard does require at least one collection point in every county. That's the baseline. And then in addition to that minimum requirement, additional depots are required based on many other parameters. And then there are additional factors that we're using to consider where we will be siting depots, including incorporated versus unincorporated areas. There are parts of the state identified that specifically require siting depots in unincorporated areas, so we are working on that. Proximity to transit in areas where there are multiple depots that will be sited. And an overall goal that 95% of Oregonians live within 15 miles of a depot. All right, I'd like to share a little bit about an overview of the funding and reimbursement model for depot sites. As we work to establish the network of Pro Depot acceptance list locations, our approach focuses on supporting partners through various forms of compensation and resources. Let's walk through the key components of the compensation model. First, necessary site improvements. The first step will be evaluating what's necessary at a given site to make it suitable for pro materials collection. This could involve site improvements such as adding additional covered area or creating fencing for security. We'll assess each location individually to determine what the needs are to be able to be a functional and efficient material collection site for the pro materials. We'll also be providing reimbursement for the space used. So it's a lease reimbursement. We'll provide this reimbursement for the area needed to house our equipment, such as a sea container or trailer, which we'll get into a little bit in just a moment. And our standard model is to cover the space needed for the equipment footprint times 2, and the additional space is to allow for operational flexibility, room for consumers to access the equipment and for pickup and collection of the materials. And then third, staff support based on site needs. So we will, when it comes to labor, provide a reimbursement for a portion of a full-time employee, with the understanding that some sites may require additional staffing. So there's flexibility there, and it will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. We'll evaluate each site's specific needs and tailor our compensation accordingly to ensure there is sufficient staff to oversee the collection and sortation of Pro Depot materials. And then training. Training is a critical component of our support. We'll provide training to on-site staff to ensure they're equipped with the knowledge and skills to handle materials safely and effectively, to be able to work with customers when they bring the materials for drop-off, and to ensure compliance with the relevant regulations to understand what can and cannot be accepted through the Pro Depot network. PPE. In addition to training, we'll provide personal protective equipment for staff, safety gear such as goggles, vests, hats, for individuals who will be working with our materials at the depots. And very importantly, design and printing of education and outreach materials. We have a very big commitment to our outreach programs. We'll design and provide educational outreach materials tailored to the needs of each depot. These materials will help raise awareness in the community, educate residents on proper recycling practices, and promote the success of the program. We'll ensure that all depots have access to these resources to engage the public and ensure smooth operations. Here's a snapshot of what will provide our depot partners. The shipping container, which we'll get into more detail on momentarily. Collection receptacles that will be in and around the container for the actual holding and containing of the pro materials people bring in. Those will include drums, rolling racks, bins, and totes. We'll provide ongoing support to ensure that the depot is complying with performance standards. And to that end, we'll provide every site with an operations handbook. Of course, education and outreach materials, as I mentioned, and then on-site signage to direct consumers, provide information about hours, what can be collected, and how to make sure that contamination is minimized. In addition, education and outreach materials will provide all the signage to make sure that the depot is a good resource for the local community. Okay, so now I'd like to get into a quick snapshot of the shipping container that we'll is an option for many of the sites we'll be working with. We have both a smaller 20-foot and a larger 40-foot. So this is a quick look at what a potential layout for a 20-foot shipping container might be. This is a visual representation, and it gives you a chance to see that within it we'll be able to store all the different material types and have roll-up door access on one side with a fully opening door for collection on one end of the container. Here is a sample layout of the 40-foot container, which similarly has roll-up doors, different receptacles for different types of materials optimized by material type. And for the 40-foot, we're intending to put fully opening doors on both ends to optimize efficiency and make sure that the unit works at a larger variety of sites operationally. And then within the shipping containers, we'll have specific receptacles, as I mentioned, for different material types. So this is just to give you a sense of the types of things we'll be providing. So drums like this one would be used for films such as plastic bags and also for bags of shredded paper. Totes, similar to the center image, would be used for collecting glass. And sleeve packs are a versatile and stackable lightweight way to collect things like lids, rigid drink carrier handles, and foil, as well as the bulky plastic buckets. CAA is currently building out a partnership with Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative, OBRC, to provide the logistics, material collection, transportation, aggregation for all of our pro materials depots across Oregon. The rollout of pro depots will follow a regional deployment strategy that is aligned with the regional processing centers and service zones that OBRC has established and operates in. The 5 regional bases of service operations are as follows: White City, which serves Southern Oregon; Redmond, serving Central Oregon; Clackamas, serving Metro and much of Northwest Oregon; Pendleton, serving Eastern Oregon and Northeastern Oregon; and then Eugene, serving Southwest Oregon. This regional rollout strategy allows CAA to focus on operational excellence, optimized regional communication, and continuous improvement as we gather data and learn from this brand new operational mission. We're creating a service agreement with OBRC and expect to have that finalized this spring. Here's kind of an overview of the timeline of the Pro Depot program. So now we're in the planning stage between now and June. And we've done quite a bit of outreach already, but that continues as the spring rolls along. We're deeply immersed in the planning phase of the depot development. And then now through June, we expect to continue with the planning and outreach and contracting through CAA's parent funding agreement, the PFA, with interested parties. We're also simultaneously working, as I mentioned, with OBRC to establish a service agreement with the state. And then in Q3, once the law goes into effect on July 1st, we'll be deploying our first region of Pro Depots. And this includes 4 counties in Southern Oregon. And then the next stage will also be in later 2025 with our second region. And then regions 3 and 4 will be deployed within 2026. And then our plan is for the final region in Oregon will go live in 2027. Additionally, I want to note that community collection events are a part of the Pro Depot model, and we will be collecting materials through events as well. We're going to test different event models in 2025 and lay out a plan for strategic deployment of events as needed, offering collection events in the regions that are activated and might still have gaps in the network of Pro Depots. In addition to the parent funding agreement, there is a specific legal addendum for sites wanting to be Pro Depots, and that is the Pro Depot Service Addendum. So here's a little bit more information about the addendum and how it will work. So here are a few questions. What does the addendum cover? It covers the reimbursement a site will receive for hosting a pro material collection point, as well as outlining site performance standards. So in this addendum, it will include our details on the lease reimbursement, staffing plan, and site improvements for each individual site. Who needs to sign this? An entity hosting a collection point for pro acceptance list materials. When does it need to be signed by? This will be after consultation with the CAA team to determine the site needs and reimbursement rates and the timing. So as I mentioned, we're doing a regional rollout. So we'll be targeting specific areas of Oregon and doing outreach and working with you on determining all of these parameters for your addendum. And then what should you be doing now to get ready? If you're interested in hosting a pro collection point, a depot, confirm your site is on the CAA list for consideration, and that's in the program plan. And if you're not, then we welcome your outreach. Let's begin a conversation. And then next steps. Thank you so much for your attention and interest in this topic and learning more about pro acceptance list depots. I'm so appreciative of your time. So let's talk about next steps. The first thing is to ensure that the DEQ provided funding authorization form is submitted back to your DEQ representative by March 31st. And then second, the local government or service provider identified in the funding authorization form should then review and sign CAA's parent funding agreement, the PFA. This agreement is for any entity entering into contract or receiving funds from CAA. Meanwhile, the CAA team, me and Nick and a few others, will be reaching out to potential depot sites in Southern Oregon, our first region, over the next few weeks. Really excited to kick off the process. During that regional outreach, we'll ask sites to complete a Pro Depot survey, which will help us understand the operational needs of your site, the specific details such as hours of operation, accessibility, what materials you currently collect, and truck accessibility and some other really key things, just to getting to work to put together the details for your potential depot. Reach out anytime. Our team is eager to share information and to start a discussion.
Great. Thanks, Marisa. That was a lot of good information. We have some questions flowing in, but before we get there, just want to give a plug for some upcoming webinars in this series as well. Hopefully folks got a lot of information from today's webinar, and there's more to come. So as you can see, there's future topics coming up soon. The next webinar will cover education and outreach here in Oregon. And in March, we will focus on collecting and recycling the uniform statewide collection list of materials, that other list that Marisa talked about at the top. And then we'll have funding agreements part 2. So we had part 1 a couple weeks ago. This will cover the more in depth on that one. All of these webinars run from 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific time. And again, Jerry will drop a link to the CA website where you can learn more and register.